We have three kids. John, our oldest, who is 5 years older than Marlo, our daughter. And John is 6 years older than Jim, our youngest son. We adopted Jim when he was about 4 years old. And when Jim became a teenager, he became heavily addicted to drugs, alcohol. And for 20 years, the journey was unbelievably dark. There were years we didn't know where he was. Our encounters with Jim were infrequent, but when we did have encounters with him, most often it was because he'd had a great loss of some kind. We found him in the hospital a couple of times, beaten to within just inches of his life. He'd become involved in so many things that his life was broken, his body was broken, the personality was disintegrating. The eyes were sinking back into his head, his teeth were terrible. He was trembling and shaking the last time we saw him before he was finally incarcerated for 7 years. You can't imagine how this strong, tall, 6'4", 240-pound athlete could disintegrate to just a shell of the man he'd been. We were desperate. Jim was in prison. There were days when we wept and cried in the dark of the night, hoping against hope that somehow we could help him. It could hardly seem any darker. We talked to Jim 2 or 3 times, and it was not going well. He was angry at everybody and everything. One day, as we talked to him, he began to complain to me about an old hard-shell Baptist preacher. He was a guy who'd come every now and then, an evangelist, who'd come to the prison. Dad, Jim would say, he butchers the Bible. He screams and yells. He'll baptize anybody at the drop of a hat, but there's no change in their lives. He said it's just a farce. It's a joke. There's nothing going on. We continued to pray, oh God, whatever you can do. It just seemed hopeless. And one day we got a phone call from Jim, and he began to talk about this hard-shell Baptist preacher. He'd gotten to know him a little better, and we would just talk a bit. And one day he said something to us about reading the Bible, and we both just sort of sat there wondering, now, what does this mean? I'll remember the day when Jim called and said, hey, Dad, I was baptized. Well, who baptized you, Jim? Well, the Baptist preacher. And I said, well, did it make any difference? In response to the conversations we'd had, he said, oh, Dad, it's made a tremendous difference. One thing led to another, and over the next several months, I began to realize something had happened. Jim had come home. The transformation was so complete, so utterly out of every category I could ever name. I didn't have a part in it. I was not the one who had prayed him through. His mother, as desperately as we'd prayed over and over again, were not a part of what happened here. But somehow, in the amazing economy of God, God slipped into an Oklahoma prison and began to rearrange a young man's life. And he says to us now, I will forever be grateful to God that he put me here because I met an old hard-shell Baptist preacher and I came face to face with Jesus Christ, and I'll never be the same again. Well, in the midst of all the despair of our praying, God had already been at work far beyond our knowing. And when we were praying as if there were very few things we could hope for, we can now look back and realize we serve a God who is at work when we don't know he's working. And Jim, our lost boy, is home again.